Today we're talking about the Sigma 105mm f2.8 macro. But first, if you're new to the channel, my name is Anson, and on this channel we talk about filmmaking, specifically budget gear, tutorials, and the behind the scenes look at the projects that I'm working on. So if that's something you're into, consider subscribing. Now first off, I do want to thank Sigma for sending me this lens to test, but as always, they have not asked I say anything specifically about this lens, and so you get my full and honest opinion. Now we're going to do a little bit of a throwback and how we approach this lens review. I am going to give you my pros and cons as well as a conclusion of what I think about this lens. So let's start off with the pros. And the first pro for me is obviously going to be image quality. You guys should not be surprised by now. I am a huge Sigma fan. I'm using a Sigma FP camera right now as my A camera. I'm shooting on a 24-70 f2.8, and so I'm always impressed of how good the image quality is coming from Sigma lenses. And this lens is no different. Now, I do love some good macro shots, and so I was especially excited to try this lens out. And this lens, when it comes to image quality, did not disappoint. As always, very tack sharp, and for macro shots, that is such a key feature, simply because when you're trying to do macro shots, you want those fine details. One of the things I did a shoot with was an old kind of collectible scuba diving helmet, and just seeing the fine grained details in that helmet with this lens was so amazing. So that's one of the first pros for me, is just overall image quality. The next pro for me is the fact that you have a physical aperture ring. I like that Sigma is starting to implement this in some of their lenses. Now I do think that this aperture is still electronically controlled, because if you go and start using the physical aperture ring, you can see there's somewhat of a delay, especially when you do the clickless aperture option, which is available, and it's a nice touch for filmmakers. But I think it's kind of a miss for some filmmakers, simply because when you want that aperture ring declicked, you also want it really responsive. And so know that going into it, while there is a clickless aperture option, which is great in theory for filmmakers, there is a digital delay to it, so be aware of that. But I do appreciate the physical aperture ring itself. The next pro for me is the fact that you can limit the focusing range of the lens. When you start using this lens and you try to change it from infinity focus to the minimum focusing distance, there is actually a long focusing throw, which is actually really helpful, because with a macro lens, you want some of those fine-tune adjustments when it comes to focusing. And so having a longer focusing throw like that is actually really nice. But another thing you can do with this lens is you can change different focusing ranges, and you have 3 different levels. You can go from all the way from minimum focusing to infinity focus, but then you also have a couple more settings in the focusing range to potentially limit the focusing distance, which is really nice, so that you can pull or rack focus when you're in that macro range of the focusing ring. And so being able to limit the focusing range is a nice bonus to have on this lens as well. And then the last pro for me is the price. Simply put, this lens comes in around $800, and the quality that you get from this lens for $800 is really awesome. And so I think if you're looking at a good macro lens and you want to stay relatively on a budget, this is absolutely a lens to check out. And so with that, what are some of the cons? And I do actually have some cons. There are some things about this lens that I just don't like. The first con for me is the fact that it is focus by wire. Sigma is starting to put focus by wire more in their art series lenses, and some of the lenses you don't really notice the focus by wire, like the 24-70 is focus by wire, but the way it approaches focus by wire is almost a near linear focusing system. This is not that. This is full-on focus by wire. Now, I do understand that limiting the focusing range may be helped by the fact that it's focused by wire, and so that may be a sacrifice that's worth having in this type of scenario. And let's be real, I'm not trying to put a follow focus system on this lens, but at the same time, I do wish it was not a focus by wire system. The next con for me is the lack of stabilization, and honestly, this is probably the biggest con for me. At 105mm, not having stabilization on this lens can definitely be maddening at times, trying to get any motion in your shot without a whole bunch of micro jitters. Now, if you're working with an A7S III or an S5, or I think the S1H has stabilization, if you're working with any of those cameras, you may have the in-body stabilization, but I'm working with an FP. That kind of makes me want to get the older version of this lens that's made for Canon EF mount that does have stabilization, and maybe get Sigma's adapter for EF to L mount. So that may be the only thing that tips me over the edge with going with that macro lens, is the fact there's no stabilization on this lens at all. And so for me, that is just a huge miss. And like I said, the only reason why I'm on the fence of whether I would recommend this lens or not. So with that, what is my conclusion? What are my overall thoughts? Would I recommend buying this lens? I do think if you're a Panasonic S-line user, or maybe even a Sony a7S III or a7 III, basically a full frame Sony camera that has IBIS, this is an absolutely amazing lens to check out. If you're a Sigma FP user, the only thing that I would say if you check out this lens, because I think overall this is an amazing lens, but the only thing I would factor in when you are buying this lens is the fact there's no stabilization. But if you know that going into it and you're okay with that, if you have a solution for shaky footage without having IBIS on the FP or stabilization on the lens, by all means, this is an amazing lens. I love the image that comes from it. I think it's great for the price, a great quality. If you're looking for a great full frame macro lens on a budget, absolutely check out the 105mm f2.8 from Sigma. So that's it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, I want to thank Sigma for sending this out to me. I'm always appreciative of being able to test some of these lenses, especially as me being a Sigma user. I get to test these out before I potentially buy them. And this is one that potentially I will be buying here in the near future. I do love a good macro shot, and this will absolutely give me that. As always, if you did enjoy this video, make sure to give it a like. If you're digging the overall content from the channel, consider subscribing. Go and find your journey. Go embrace life. Stay safe, be happy, support each other. Wash those hands, and I'll see you here next time. Peace.